Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz, and with us today is a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado. He is the author of more than 80 articles and numerous books, including Progressive Myths, which he's here to discuss today. Professor Mike Huemer, welcome to the show. Hey, you got it?
Yeah, that's right. Here
I
it is.
got it. Great,
Yes,
great
thanks.
book.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, the first thing I want to know is what motivated you to write this book?
Well, I suppose that I got tired of hearing lies and,
Fair enough.
and divisive lies that are damaging to the country. Yeah, and when you're in the academic world, it's very left-wing oriented, and so yeah, I'm not sure that anyone else was going to write a book like this. Okay, yeah, there are a lot of sort of right-wing things attacking the left, but I wanted to confront what appears to be the empirical evidence for progressivism, and I wanted to confront sort of straightforward empirical factual claims, which
Right.
appear to strongly support it, but in fact are bogus.
One thing I really enjoy in reading this book is that you're obviously not a nut, right? And what I mean is
That's a good point. That's one of my best
and,
traits.
but the my point is that as an academic, you write very much like an academic in the sense of using logic, presenting the empirical evidence. You don't say, for instance, vaccine mandates are a bad thing. Therefore, the COVID vaccine is killing people at an alarming rate. And it seems that there are a lot of people that can't just take the criticism or use a criticism like vaccines should not be mandated. They have to go the extra step. Or instead of saying mask mandates are a bad idea, they'll say, I hate anybody wearing a mask.
Yeah, yeah.
And when someone does that, it takes away from the message that they're actually trying to get across because my immediate reaction is, okay, this is not a person to be taken seriously,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, that might be because you're the rational egoist, but if the audience is the irrational, whatever, egoist or altruist or whatever, because like a lot of people just they just eat up the partisan propaganda. So, um,
Yeah. So how do you define progressivism? When you wrote a book, it's called Progressive Myths. What is progressivism?
yeah, well, I mean the short answer to how I define it is that I don't define it. Um, now, and you may not like this, but my view about definitions is that almost nothing can be defined. Okay. However, so like, I can't define table. That doesn't mean that I don't know what a table is, though.
Mhm.
The way that somebody learns a concept is by seeing examples of it. Okay, and so like if somebody actually didn't know what progressives were, I would give examples. I'd say, okay, here's AOC, she's considered a progressive. Here's some stuff that she said. Okay, so I give examples of things that progressives say, like, the country is extremely racist, and they're like, cops are murdering black people just for the fun of it, and then like, oh, it's also very sexist, and like talk about the gender pay gap and stuff like that, right? And then stuff about how the poor are being oppressed by the rich, and so. The global warming, another progressive idea.
Well, you mentioned global warming. So progressivism, it's a left wing. I'm going to give a little bit of a definition. It's a
Yeah.
left wing ideology that asserts basically that it's making progress. It's also gone by the name liberalism, which I agree is not a good idea because they're very
Yeah.
illiberal, but they use it nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tend to stray from what is the norm and want to go beyond that. So if, for
Yeah.
instance, racism, there was a time when racism was acceptable in the country. So then they say, okay, we need to end racism. Now that racism has largely, not totally, but largely been eradicated, they move on to saying things like implied racism or implicit
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
racism or
Unconscious. It's systemic, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
the
It moves on
is
to the next thing. It's as if we're always going to look for a fault in the present and look for a way to move beyond that, whether it's logical or not. Now, you
yeah.
did enumerate an abundance of these myths. What are some of them and why are
Oh,
they myths?
oh yeah. I was just going to comment more about progressivism. Now, I don't know that this is exactly about progressivism, but it's about wokeism. Now, what's happened is You've taken the bigotry that our society used to have and just like reversed its direction.
Yeah,
It's like this is the central thing about wokeism. We used to have bigotry against black people on the part of whites, and so now we just need to have bigotry against white people, and that'll like balance the scale.
balance the scales, right?
Yeah, used to have prejudice against women. Now we need to replace it with prejudice against men. Okay. And you see this with the affirmative action, but you also see this with just like this sort of propaganda about how bad white men are. And it's just like anybody who isn't themselves infected by the woke mind virus can see the hatred of white men that's like constantly going on. Like if you ever, met somebody who was talking that way about any other group, you wouldn't have a second hesitation saying that person is a bigot. Like
Right.
somebody's constantly going on about how bad the Jews are and like all the things the Jews have done in history to the Gentiles. You would say that guy's an anti-Semite, right?
Of
So
course
anyway,
you would.
okay. Um, okay, so sorry, I went off and I didn't
No, it's
answer this
okay.
question. Sorry, what was the last question again?
I'll tell you, just want to give you a somewhat humorous example of what you just talked about. Maybe I'm 48 now, so I was 19. So maybe 29, 30 years ago, I was driving around with some friends of mine, and this was back when I was in my criminal element. And these guys are listening to a song by a rapper called MC Ren. And the guy says in the song, there's black people that claim their best friends are white. Those are the type you tie them to a pole and beat them in the night, right? And I'm telling the guys I'm with, like, what are you guys crazy? I'm with a bunch of white kids listening to this and they're bopping their heads. And I'm like, why are you listening to this garbage? Like, what is wrong with you? But the thing is, if a white person, a white rapper were to come out and say the exact same thing, but with it being a black person he was talking about beating in the night, it would be a national travesty. And that was 20 something odd years ago. I can't imagine. I don't listen to rap music now, but the degree to which white men, you're right, are attacked. And I'm not into victimism. Let me just put that out. As a white man, I have plenty that I'm okay with. But a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the woke movement and certainly the policies they advocate and some even they implement are anti-white male. It's undeniable.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I asked you, what are some of the myths of
Oh,
progressivism?
yeah, good. These are some popular ones. The gender pay gap, the claim that women get paid a lot less than men for the same work. The most recent thing they say is women get paid 82 cents for every dollar that men make. Another one is that the police in America, they get to kill black people just for being black. And that they're doing that frequently, perfectly harmless. Oh, wait, your picture just disappeared. Okay. Another one is that global warming is going to kill everyone. Um, and what else? There's some things in that line. Um, there's the women don't lie. Like women almost never lie about rape or sexual assault. There's this stuff about gender, like gender is a social construction or something.
Yeah.
And
One
um,
of, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, and but also that like um, you're just whatever gender you say you are. So anybody who says that they are X gender is that gender.
My take on that is simple when it comes to gender dysphoria or transgenderism is if you say to me, this is a male who identifies as a woman, I say, okay, so a transgender woman is a man who identifies as a woman. That's simple to me. It's not a woman. I don't mind that he identifies as a woman. I really don't care. I have no problem with him. I'd befriend him, whatever, but I'm not going to make believe that it's now a woman. I mean, that gets to be pretty strange, especially when you have, I've heard it said that if a heterosexual male won't date a transgender woman, then this is a bigot of some sort. I mean, that's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, well, I mean that's a particularly silly idea, right? Because like I don't date all women. So it's just
No,
like if I'm not dating you, that doesn't mean I'm saying you're not a woman. But by the way, you're not a woman. Anyway,
no.
um, well, I mean that sort of depends upon what woman means. So it's partly it's a semantic question, right? Like because like it's like we know what's going on, right? We know the person is biologically male, so that's their biological sex. So there's just a question about whether the word woman refers to your biological sex. Is it a biological characteristic or is it like a psychological characteristic? And so, maybe it refers to your gender, which is in your mind rather than in your body, right?
Yeah, the two kind of, I don't know, they get mixed up in a way. Like I thought your analysis was great because it's clear to me. I mean, I've watched documentaries where there's kids that are like 4, and it's
Yes.
clear that something's going on there.
Yeah,
That
they're
this
not.
this yeah, they're not in tune with their natural sex, with what they were born at. And it's
Yeah,
obvious from mannerisms, tone of voice, the toys they pick out, what the, all of it. So I have no problem
definitely.
with that. I just have a problem with it being, I don't want to say pushed. I want to say misexplained. They're expecting people to think it's something other than it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that anybody's substantively misunderstanding that. Right? So, yeah, so there are people who think that they were born in the wrong body. And then there's just a question of how to describe that. You could say, oh, it's a woman in a man's body or something. And you might think, like, what the hell does that mean? How can there be a woman in a man's body? But my theory is, well, there um evolution designed certain like adaptations for the two sexes, and they're different. And they're in the brain. So the brains of men and women differ on average in certain respects, and there are probably some respects that we haven't detected. But so it's possible, it makes sense that there could be a sort of female typical brain that is in an otherwise male body. Right. So that's my theory about what happened with some of these cases. And however, this is a very rare phenomenon. So according to the DSM in 2013, so this is the standard reference work for psychiatrists, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the fifth edition. The frequency was something like 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 100,000 in the population. And today, it's something more like 1% of people are saying that they have gender dysphoria. So there's been this vast explosion. And so you could say, oh, well, maybe it was just underdiagnosed before by a factor of 100. Or maybe there's something different going on, right? So the original phenomenon that gave rise to anyone thinking that there was such a thing as transgenderism, I think, was really some people being born in the wrong body. But now there's different things going on where people are saying that they're transgender when that really isn't their situation. They don't really have a female typical brain in a male body. They have a male brain in a male body. They're just confused about something, right? And why do I think that? Well, first, like there's this thing, this phenomenon of autogynephilia. So there's a particular sexual fetish where men are sexually excited by the thought of themselves having a woman's body. Okay, and there's like pretty good evidence for this just from like surveys where like trans women themselves will say that they have these feelings. Okay, and if that's the reason that you want to transition, that is not having feminine gender. Like that is not how women are.
No, no, not any I know anyway.
That doesn't, yeah, that doesn't make you woman. Uh, and then the other thing that's going on is actually transgenderism has increased, or like gender dysphoria has increased among teenage girls. And there's probably this kind of social contagion. So there's pretty good evidence for this that um these teenage girls are being influenced by their peer group and by some content on the internet to think that they're trans when they're not. And so, like some of the evidence for this is that it runs in friend groups. Okay, there's one story. This is anecdotal, but it's still striking. Of there's a group of like I think 4 teenage girls who had a coach, and this coach came out as trans, and then within a year, all 4 of the girls came out as trans. And so you're like, wow, is that just like coincidentally all of these people happen to be born in the wrong body? Or was it some kind of social contagion?
I have no doubt that social contagion plays a large part, but you don't deny that there's also possibly the situation where people are more comfortable now coming out in that regard than they would have been in the past.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that could be a part of the increase, even if not a large part of it?
Yeah, so it could be that it was underdiagnosed, right? Because people just didn't want to come forward. And that, right now it's overdiagnosed, right?
Sure.
So,
I thought you did a really good job in the book in your discussion of global warming, starting with the idea that we has been pounded into our heads that 97% of scientists say that global warming is predominantly caused by human behavior. What is the actual statistic? What does that
yeah.
statistic actually refer to?
Yeah, so we don't know. We don't know. I don't know how many, and I think nobody knows how many scientists think that global warming was predominantly human caused. The study that the 97% was from was actually a survey of abstracts of academic articles. Okay, and actually the majority of these abstracts did not apparently take any position on anthropogenic climate change. Okay, meaning like climate change being caused by human beings. Most of them took no position. Okay, so how do you get 97%? Well, they said among the abstracts that appeared to take a position, they looked at the ones that implied or assumed that human beings had at least some role in climate change versus the ones that didn't or suggested some skeptical view. Okay, so that was 97%. Okay, now this is not that great. So first of all, like the 97%, they weren't papers that were saying humans were the main cause. They were papers saying that humans were at least part of the cause. Okay, but then it was later misquoted as humans are the main cause. And the people who wrote that study, they actually did collect evidence. They did collect, how many said that humans were the main cause, but they didn't report that. Which was presumably because it was a much smaller number, which wouldn't have been impressive for propaganda purposes. Okay. Second problem with this statistic is actually that's a survey of abstracts, not a survey of scientists. And you can't really make a very good inference to what most scientists believe. So it's possible that people who are more concerned about climate change, which could be the people who have a stronger belief in it, are more likely to publish more papers about it. It's possible that the people who are skeptical about it don't publish papers about it. These aren't, implausible hypotheses. So it would have been better if you just like surveyed scientists to see what they thought. And now it turns out that in the same year there actually was a survey. So somebody did a survey of the American Meteorological Society and asked them what they thought. And there it turned out that I think it was 54% of the members thought that human beings were part of the cause of global warming. It's real and it's partly human caused. The number was higher for climate specialists, so it was 70 something percent. Okay, so that's still pretty good. And by the way, the rest were not denying it. The rest were mostly like, we're not sure, not enough evidence or something like that. Okay. But okay, so that is still a majority, but it's not 97%. So you could see how, like the factoids that you get reported to you are exaggerated and misleading.
Now, also, there's this idea that global warming, or a majority of scientists are, they view global warming as an existential crisis for human beings. But that's not true either.
No, not at all, not remotely. Yeah, it's the opposite. So,
So,
there are these um, amazing quotations where AOC, uh, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, "The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't do something about climate change, and your biggest problem is how are we going to pay for it?" Okay, and then and she might have gotten that from Greta Thunberg. So Greta Thunberg said, all the United Science tells us that within 12 years or 11 years, there are going to be changes that will probably lead to the end of our civilization. Okay, and where did she get this? Right, so well, they started saying this in 2018, and it was prompted by a report by the IPCC. And so the IPCC is, if anything, is like the mainstream climate scientists' opinion, right? So it's this, international panel of climate experts. Okay, so they put out this report, and the report said that we had to take drastic action to reduce CO2 emissions by the year 2030 if we wanted to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees C relative to pre-industrial times. Okay, and we were already at 1 degree C by that time. So to prevent another half degree of warming, we would have to take drastic action by 2030. So that was 12 years in the future. So that's where AOC got the 12 years figure. But they never said that the failure to do so would lead to the collapse of civilization or anything remotely like that. And the IPCC has never projected the end of civilization or the end of the human species or the end of life on Earth or anything like that because they're not crazy alarmists. They're, they're normal, sane people. So, and then, and there were like multiple quotations from like mainstream climate scientists saying, yeah, there's no evidence of scenarios that would end human civilization. And what they are saying is, they have given projections of the harms of global warming, and they will give things like, by the year 2100, it will probably be costing us 2.5% of world GDP. Okay, and that's something noticeable, like 2.5% by 2100 is going to be a significant amount of money that we'll have lost, that we'll be losing, but it's not 100%. It's not the death of everyone.
No.
And yeah, they were projecting, IPCC was projecting an excess 250,000 deaths per year by the middle of the century. That is out of a projected 91 million total deaths from all causes. Okay, so global warming will perhaps account for 0.25% of the death rate. All right, so that is not nothing like 250,000 deaths a year is significant. We should prevent if we can, but it's very far from the end of our civilization. And there are many other global problems that are killing many more people than that.
Sure. Now you have a very good theory as to why these type of ideas thrive in academia. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, in the academic world, I mean, the academic world has a pretty big left-wing bias, you could say. Um, I mean, and I think this sort of goes back to the 1960s when there were two big kind of political causes that came onto the university campuses. There were civil rights and the Vietnam War. Okay. And the Vietnam War ended, and like when it ended, you couldn't really pretend that it was still going on. It was just like, it would be pretty hard to say that. All right. But the civil rights movement protesting racism and other prejudice, you could keep saying that racism is going on. There's like no definite point at which it ends in the way there's a definite point at which the war ended. Okay. So what happened was as the racism kept declining, people just kept developing more expansive views of what the problem is. And the reason for doing that is that they wanted to keep the movement alive. And the reason for doing that was psychological rewards that you get from being part of this movement. So the people in the 1960s, like this was a long time ago, and I don't remember it because, I wasn't alive, but I believe what people have told me about it. And, yeah, that, being part of this movement for, racial justice and whatever, this great movement for social justice, it gave people a sense of meaning, that their life is meaningful, and it gave them a sense of community because they were part of this group of like-minded individuals working for a common cause. Right? And that was something that people psychologically needed. And then if you admit that you achieved your goal, then you have to disband. And so you have to give that up. So you don't want to do that. So you just like keep redefining, right? Or you just like expand your notion of what is racism, right? And then you have to get like increasingly subtle things like, well, it's unconscious. And that's why we're not observing it. And then, it's systemic, like meaning like it's in the system, which is like one of the vaguest ideas that you can come up with, right? Because that makes it hard to refute. And like if you're just talking about actually definite acts of racism that you like particular events that you could point at, then it's easy to observe them. And then you could see that they're declining and you could see that they're like practically gone. But if you just say, no, there's just racism in the system and it's in your mind unconsciously, like it's hard to refute that. So anyway, okay. So that's what happened.
And it also, you talk about the difficulty of, for instance, getting positions or getting a paper published. And you made a good point that even if there's only a slight bias toward the left, if you've got a conservative that writes a paper that's equally as good as someone on the left, even the slightest of bias would tilt in favor of publishing the leftist paper.
Yeah, yeah, good. Yeah, so, the important thing to understand about the academic world is it's extremely competitive. And so these academic journals, they get many, many more papers than they can publish. Okay, and there are going to be many papers that are close in quality, where it's sort of like it could go either way, whether you publish it or not. So, there could be certain referees are biased, and they will just have a negative view of something with a conservative viewpoint. Okay, now, perhaps a more concern is when it comes to academic hiring. Okay, if we advertise a job, so here at the University of Colorado, I've been around for a while and we've advertised several jobs over the years. When we advertise a job, we get hundreds of applications for a single position. And at the end of our, near the end of our review process, there's going to be like 10 or 20 people who are all have excellent qualifications. They're all going to be comparable to each other. Okay, and so now if there's like one person on the committee who's biased against conservatives, and they don't even have to be absolutely biased, they could just be a little bit biased, and like that could result in the conservative candidates getting lower ratings and therefore just not making the cut. Okay, so a little bit of prejudice could just like be a major problem for a right-wing candidate.
Now, I think you do a great job of establishing that these are myths. Now, what is the danger of the myths? I mean, if people think that cops are shooting black people at an alarming rate, or racism is on the rise, or discrimination against
Yeah.
trans people, like what's the problem with these myths?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. So, one of the problems about the race myths, like, you mentioned that people think that the cops are, um, they're these monsters who murder you just for being black. Okay, so like you could think about just short-term practical results of that. So, a result of that is that um, people in black communities don't trust the cops. Result of that is that they're less willing to rely on the cops. So, if there's a crime, they're less willing to call the cops, which means that it's easier for criminals to get away with things. Okay. It could also result in people um, just when the cops show up being less cooperative. And so, like not telling the cops anything when they're trying to investigate a crime, or like when the cops are questioning you because they suspect you of something, then you might react in a hostile way. And then like the interaction degenerates. Okay. So like it's just not good for black people. Um, but all the progressive myths, you know, they have all these, different, a little bit different myths, but they do all have a common theme, which is the common theme is kind of attacks on our society, right? So like, oh, our society is horribly racist. The white people are oppressing the black people, and then you like tell the black people that the majority of their society hates them and is against them. Okay, but then also the men are oppressing the women. And, so like you try to tell the women that half of their society hates them or something like that, right? They have this misogyny and sexism and whatever. And then, the global warming thing, like, oh, well, our society is actually destroying the planet. And we're actually in danger of killing everyone. We're going to kill everyone. That's how bad we are, right? So, okay, yeah, common theme, we're evil. And what's wrong with that? I mean, now this is speculation on my part, but I think that a society needs to have a certain amount of loyalty and trust. That is, the members of the society have to feel loyalty towards the society and trust in its institutions, right? And why do we need this? We need this because you have to take some amount of cost in order to enforce the norms of your society. If norms don't get enforced, then they stop working. And then if the norms stop working, then we're just screwed. Okay. Um, so yeah, and it requires some amount of cost and some amount of effort to enforce the norms when like, the small number of people who are violating the norms, somebody has to do something to them. Okay. And like what's the motive to do that? The motive to do that is that you trust in the norms of your society and you have loyalty to it. Right. And you trust in the institutions that are supposed to help enforce the norms. Okay, but why would you have any trust or any loyalty to your society if you think that it's evil? and unjust and oppressive and all of this stuff, right? So I feel like the progressives are undermining sort of the foundations of our civilization.
In the wake of the Trump re-election, where do you think progressivism stands? I mean, I've seen people claim that's it, progressivism's defeated, or woke is defeated in relation to Trump's election. I'm very skeptical about that. What do you think?
Yeah, so I don't know. I can't really predict. It seems like there's two ways they could go depending on, depending on how the Democrats decide to react, right? So one way it could go is they could just double down. Like, okay, the reason we lost was racism. So like, the American people are evil, they're racist, they're sexist, they couldn't have a black woman, right? That's why they didn't vote for Kamala. So that means that we just have to double down and like increase our anti-racist propaganda or whatever. And like we need to put more anti-racism in the schools or whatever. Now, the other way they could go is admit that they fucked up. Like maybe because I'm hearing some people saying like, yeah, like that, the left they went too crazy. And this is what we got for it. It's like they shouldn't have been pushing the transgender thing, and like some people have noticed that, well, the Democrats they weren't campaigning on woke causes. So you might think, oh, so it wasn't that. It wasn't that they were too woke. So maybe it was that the people are too racist. But Trump was campaigning on anti-woke
Right.
issues, right? So there's that famous ad where he says, she's for they, them. Trump is for you. Okay, now, so like the fact that Kamala Harris wasn't saying, "Hey, I'm running for president to get transgenders and transgender people into schools or whatever to convert your kids," that doesn't mean that that wasn't part of the reason why people voted against her, right? Because even though she didn't say that, like other leftists have been saying that, and then she just
Sure.
kind of gets tarred with it because she's the Democrat.
I've heard Sam Harris refer to wokeism as Trumpism as twin nightmares.
Yeah,
And I've also heard a phrase, the woke right. And I can't help but notice, and you actually refer to this dynamic in your book. When I was incarcerated, I've had debates with religious people, conspiracy theorists, and I always noticed there was a common theme within their method is that they were impregnable. So no matter what you would have, even when you would defeat them, it would be evidence that they were correct. So the religious person would say, well, of course you're going to say that. The devil is making you say that.
I
Or
see.
the conspiracy theorist would say, something along the lines of, well, of course, your source is going to say that they're part of the conspiracy. So no evidence that I could present would do it. And I had an argument with an old friend of mine. He told me something, and I said, well, I just looked that up. It wasn't true. He said, well, you looked on Google. Google's no good. You have to go to DuckDuckGo. So I went to DuckDuckGo, and DuckDuckGo told me the same thing Google said. And then he said, no, but you have to keep looking. And I said, okay, so what you're telling me then is I have to keep looking until I find confirmation for what you're saying. And I think that that's a similar thing when discussing with the progressive or the wokesters. It's, well, of course, you're going to say that you're a white man or you're a racist or that, that's how you were trained, whatever. But with the Trumpsters, I come across the same thing. Well, you're just getting that from the mainstream media, or
Yeah.
you've been watching too much CNN or listening to too much MSNBC or whatever. So I just wonder if you see similarities between progressivism or wokeism and uh,
Yeah.
MAGA or Trumpian populism.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes, neither side would like this, but like I hate them both for the same reason, right? I'm against wokeism for the same reason that I'm against Trumpism, which is that I value our society. I value what we've achieved, right? And the institutions that we built up, which work fairly well. And like there's a surprising number of people who totally don't appreciate the privilege of living in America, the privilege of living in a incredibly prosperous, free, happy, well-ordered society And the reason they don't appreciate this is perhaps that they don't have the slightest idea of how human beings have lived throughout almost all of history, right? Like this society is a Shangri-La in comparison with most societies in human history, and we should just appreciate that. Okay. Anyway, so my point being, I want to preserve what's working in our society. It's not perfect. There's still things that can be fixed, but I don't want to blow it up. And like that's why I don't like Trump, and that's why I don't like the wokists, because both of them think that like they want to blow up our society. They want to dismantle it. Um, and then, like you'd mentioned this sort of dogmatism where you try to give somebody evidence against their views, and then it's just like it doesn't matter. They're just like going to interpret everything. This is like, a thing that paranoid people do. Like you try to talk the paranoid schizophrenic out of their delusions, and then they'll say, "Oh, they've gotten to you too."
Yes.
So this
Yes.
reminds me of one of these videos. There's this video where Jordan Klepper is interviewing Trumpers. He has all these videos where he interviews the Trumpers about things. He should do the wokester sometime. But anyway, okay. So um, he's interviewing these two women at a Trump rally and asking them about the election fraud story, right? That, they think that the election was stolen from Trump. And he's like, he shows them a video of Bill Barr. This is Trump's attorney general saying, the story was bullshit, right? And they're like, oh, they've gotten to him. The Democrats have gotten to him, whatever. And Klepper says, whoa, well, okay, so you would only trust Trump and his family, right? And they're like, yeah, okay. And then he shows them a video of Ivanka Trump saying like she was convinced by Bill Barr. Okay. And then they say, well, I don't know, that could be a deep fake video.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay. So at this point, there's nothing that would convince you, right? Like if there's a video of Trump saying, yep, I was lying, they could just still say, oh, well, it was fake.
Yeah,
So,
which I guess it's kind of my fault for even engaging in debates with these people because it's a pointless endeavor. One of the things you alluded to in the book, and I think you've written about it elsewhere, talked about it elsewhere, is the importance of trusting experts. Now, I know that that's out of vogue these days. Oh yeah, of course, the experts, they don't lie. But I told the guy one time, okay, well, when you're sick and you have an illness coming and you don't know what it is, go to the guy on Twitter and ask him to fix it. I'm going to the doctor,
yeah.
right? Because I understand that I can't know everything. I can't even know a fraction of what there is to know. I don't know how to fix a car. I don't know how to
Yeah.
sew. If my microphone breaks, I don't know how to fix it. I have to trust people that know what they're doing. It's impossible not to. And I think on one hand, that illustrates the danger of progressive myths and the danger when experts lie, because it creates the boy who cried wolf phenomenon. But on the other side, this idea that we can't trust experts is just absurd, isn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, so it's not really you're not really going to have much of a life if you don't trust other people at all. Right? Now, I want to say, we should have like maybe a nuanced position where sometimes you trust the experts and sometimes you don't, but it can't just be like, just, I'm just not going to listen to doctors. Like, well, you're gonna have trouble.
Big trouble. Yeah.
And but you shouldn't just like always listen to them because, well, they could be lying. So like you could think about um what are their incentives? Okay, so like if teachers are telling you that really like teachers need more money in order to do a better job teaching, it's reasonable to think, yeah, they could be biased there, right? Or like, if the experts that you're listening to are like the pharmaceutical company is telling you about how great their drug is, and they're experts on it, they know about their drug, right? But maybe you don't necessarily trust that because they have an ulterior motive, right? You need somebody else like, some independent academic expert or something. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree that skepticism does not, a modest degree of skepticism, I think, is great. But
Yeah.
I think you're right that if you go to, I'm going to trust everything every expert says, or I'm not going to trust any expert, both are very foolish positions to take.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and but like by the way, like okay, so like I heard from Michael Crichton, who's like a big climate skeptic, that science has nothing to do with authority or consensus, where it doesn't matter what the majority of people think. All that matters is who's right or something like, and meaning like who has empirical evidence, to demonstrate their theory. But the thing is like actually science relies on trust in other people's testimony all the time, right? Like every scientist has to rely on what other scientists told them because like you can't like scientists who's doing original research in physics like they're not going to go back and like retest Isaac Newton's results of the hundred
No.
years. They would never make any progress, right? You
Right.
have to have a certain amount of trust.
Right. I tried to research global warming once, and the term I realized quickly I would have to learn a whole new terminology
Yeah,
in order to really understand what is being talked about, right? I'm not willing to put in that kind of effort. That would consume my life. If global warming became something I really wanted to study, it would just totally
yeah,
consume me. But that doesn't mean I can't be at the same time skeptical based on the fact that people like Paul Ehrlich, for instance, have been making predictions of catastrophe for decades. So when environmentalists make predictions, I'm skeptical of them. I'm not
yeah,
saying they're wrong because they've been wrong in the past, just I'm skeptical. And I
yeah.
simply can't learn everything. It's just not a
Yeah, yeah.
possibility, right?
That's right.
So
Yeah.
so, Professor Huemer, is there anything that you think we neglected to talk about that I maybe didn't ask that I should have, or that you would like to say about your book or your work?
Um, I don't know. I would just like to say that everybody should go buy it on Amazon. Uh,
Well,
it-
I have to say, it is endorsed here by Karl Marx and Desiderius Erasmus have both endorsed the book, and Satan says it's a horrible book.
yeah,
So I think that those are you've got some high power endorsements there.
yeah,
So where can people find you? Where can they find your work?
yeah. So, as I mentioned, go to Amazon and buy all my books. But also, I have a blog called Fake News on Substack, FAKENOUS, and I post something once a week.
Why the spelling of noose? I've always wondered this, and now I have a chance to ask.
Yeah. So, nous is the Greek word for mind. And
Oh, okay. All
yeah, and
right.
so it sounds a little bit like news. And there's a um, high prestige academic philosophy journal called News. Okay. And there's also another philosophy blog called Daily News.
Oh,
Right. So
okay.
in that general theme, I made fake news.
All right. Fair enough. Well, thanks a lot for being here with us today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Great talking to you.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.